The aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. CVN-78 has been ordered by the United States Department of Defense to deploy to the region under the responsibility of United States Southern Command, SOUTHCOM. The base at Roosevelt Roads Naval Station in Puerto Rico, shut down years ago, is reported to have been reopened for U.S. military use as a staging facility for operations in the Caribbean region. As of late October 2025, U.S. military assets in the Caribbean Sea and Puerto Rico are estimated at around 10,000 personnel. The U.S. military and the administration of Donald J. Trump, president, have stated the deployment's mission is to disrupt drug trafficking networks and transnational criminal organizations, TCOS, in the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, Nicolás Maduro remains the president of Venezuela and has publicly argued that the U.S. buildup reflects a push for regime change. The U.S. military appears to be using advanced aircraft, including F-35 fighter jets, MQ-9 Reaper drones, and at least one AC-130 gunship at bases in Puerto Rico, with reported daily operating costs for such aircraft running into tens of thousands of dollars per hour. U.S. military power projection in the Caribbean, a region now under intense strategic focus. If you were to open a map of the Southern Command area of responsibility today, you would find the United States Navy in stronger force than it has been in years. A core element of this presence is the U.S. Navy's newest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. The carrier has been directed into the Caribbean theater, bolstering U.S. firepower and signaling a clear escalation of military posture in the region. Aboard the Ford is an air wing of approximately 70 fixed-wing aircraft, fighter jets among them, along with helicopters and support aircraft. The carrier is accompanied by a strike group constellation, 3 amphibious transport ships carrying at least 4,500 Marines and sailors, a guided missile cruiser, 7 Navy destroyers, a nuclear-powered submarine, and a specialized ship dedicated to Special Operations Forces. Combined in the water are an estimated 700 vertical launch missile cells capable of firing a range of offshore missiles. These forces represent one of the largest U.S. maritime deployments in the Caribbean in decades. On land, Puerto Rico has emerged as a key staging ground. The shuttered naval facility at Roosevelt Roads has been reopened, reportedly housing some 10,000 U.S. troops. High-performance platforms have been deployed on the island too, F-35 fighters, MQ-9 Reaper drones, and at least one AC-130 gunship, each representing a significant cost. 1 hour of flight time for an F-35 is estimated at up to $33,000. A Hellfire missile, often used in ship-to-boat or air-to-surface engagements, can cost as much as $150,000 a round. Running an aircraft carrier can run $6 million to $8 million per day. This military buildup must be seen in context. Historically, the U.S. has intervened in the region. In 1965 in the Dominican Republic, in 1983 in Grenada, and in 1989 in Panama. But all of those operations were far smaller in scale. Compare the landmass of Panama, roughly 75,000 square kilometers, to Venezuela's nearly 916,000 square kilometers. Size alone makes any operation against Venezuela far more challenging. Why is this surge happening now? The U.S. says the raison d'etre is counter-drug trafficking operations. The Trump administration has declared certain Latin American criminal organizations terrorist in nature. President Trump has linked the Caribbean deployment and the positioning of the carrier strike group to efforts to dismantle transnational criminal organizations and counter narco-terrorism in defense of the homeland from the Pentagon's public statements. These forces will enhance and augment existing capabilities to disrupt narcotics trafficking and degrade and dismantle TCOS, said spokesperson Sean Parnell. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has announced the carrier deployment to the Caribbean, stressing the U.S. capability to detect, monitor, and disrupt illicit actors and activities that compromise the safety and prosperity of the United States homeland and our security in the Western Hemisphere. Satellite imagery and open-source tracking show amphibious assault ships and marine units operating off Venezuela's northern coast. Marines are conducting live-fire training aboard landing ships just miles from Venezuela under the aegis of Southern Command. For its part, Venezuela reports U.S. combat planes at 35,000 feet altitude near its coast, which the Venezuelan Defense Ministry called a provocation. In response, President Maduro says his country is facing the biggest threat that has been seen on our continent in the last 100 years. So what does this mean in practical terms? First, the surface fleet posture. The Forward Strike Group would provide massive power projection capability in the Caribbean. If deployed near the coast of Venezuela, the carrier would bring with it not only fixed-wing aircraft, fighters, strike jets, but also helicopter-borne anti-submarine platforms, maritime patrol aircraft, and a submarine escort. According to analysts at Janes and CSIS, the Ford's arrival in the Caribbean signals a new chapter. Second, the land and air dynamic. Puerto Rico is now functioning as a forward operating base. The reopening of Roosevelt Roads Naval Station provides logistic and forward-laying infrastructure for both fixed-wing fighters and remotely piloted drone assets. From the civilian airport at San Juan and adjacent airfields, the US is now operating fighters and drones into the region. At sea and airborne sensors, long-range surveillance platforms and special operations forces are integrated into the network. Third, cost and sustainability. Running an aircraft carrier and its air wing is enormously expensive, as noted. 1 hour of flight time in an F-35, for example, the US military's most advanced tactical aircraft, is estimated at up to $33,000. A single Hellfire missile may cost up to $150,000. The daily cost of keeping the carrier at sea with its full complement of aircraft, crews and escort ships runs into millions of dollars. Sustainment of this posture matters. Logistics, basing, air-sea lift, munitions stockpiles. Fourth, geopolitical signalling. This deployment cannot be read purely as counter-narcotics. The scale, carrier strike group, amphibious ships, 10,000-strong land forces in Puerto Rico suggests an intention to signal to Caracas and to the region a readiness to escalate beyond maritime interdiction. The size of Venezuela, 9 times larger than Panama, means that any direct intervention would be logistically demanding and politically fraught. In the field, pilots said that the F-35s flew from Puerto Rico into the Caribbean theatre, taking advantage of island-based airfields and logistic hubs. Meanwhile, the AC-130 gunship, rare in the region, offers persistent fire support capability. Drones like the MQ-9 Reaper provide long-endurance intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance ISR and strike options. The amphibious ships in the transport group carry Marines who could land on short notice for operations ranging from snatch and grab missions, ashore logistics support or contingency evacuations. A nuclear-powered submarine offers submerged strike and surveillance capability, while the destroyer's vertical launch missile cells provide land strike and anti-air/anti-missile capacity. Strategists note that the deployment of the carrier strike group is far larger than the typical 2 or 3 warships the US maintains in the Caribbean. According to the open-source tracker, the Ford's strike group is estimated to bring multiple destroyers and a carrier air wing into the region, the kind of capability previously reserved for major theatre operations. Regional responses are mixed. Caracas has increased its troop deployments to coastal and border regions, particularly in states such as Zulia, Sucre and Delta Amacuro, moving from an estimated 10,000 to as many as 25,000 troops in strategic zones. Some Caribbean and Latin American nations have expressed concern that the US buildup risks inflaming regional tensions or creeping beyond a counter-narcotics mission into regime change territory. In Washington, Congress has started asking tough questions. Some lawmakers warn that the deployment and unilateral strikes against alleged drug smuggling vessels may raise legal and ethical issues. Over the past weeks, US strikes on boats linked to Venezuela's criminal gangs have resulted in dozens of deaths. The maritime and air staging areas are now complemented by land-based staging. Puerto Rico's reopened base allows the US to shorten transit times for fighters, drones and gunships. From there, aircraft can reach Venezuela's northern coast with far less logistical burden. The US military's ability to base heavy air assets on the island underscores the seriousness of the commitment. Questions remain. Will the deployment remain maritime and aerial only, targeting vessels and interdiction, or evolve into a broader campaign, including operations into Venezuelan territory? The size of Venezuela, nearly 10 times that of Panama, historically invaded in 1989, means any land operation would be substantially more complex. Analysts believe that while full-scale invasion remains unlikely for now, US officials are planning for possible strikes on land-based trafficking infrastructure inside Venezuela. For US audiences, the message is twofold. First, that the US is willing to use major sea, air, land power in the Caribbean to protect the homeland from narcotics flows and TCOS. Second, that the region is now a strategic front line in Washington's view of hemispheric security. For Caracas, the message is equally stark. The US is stepping up pressure, and Venezuela may find itself facing not only illicit trafficker interdiction, but state-level coercive diplomacy backed by major military assets. From a logistics standpoint, sustaining a carrier strike group in the Caribbean will require robust naval logistics, replenishment at sea, airlift of parts and munitions, and shore-based support for air operations. In the context of a long-term deployment, the reopened Puerto Rico base and the amphibious transport hub become critical enabling nodes. Financially, the costs add up. 1 hour of F-35 flight time up to $33,000, one Hellfire missile up to $150,000, a carrier per day $6 to $8 million. These figures highlight the scale of what is underway. Not a minor patrol, but a sustained major theatre presence. In operational terms, the deployment offers the US multiple options: maritime patrol and interdiction of vessels suspected of carrying illicit cargo through the southern Caribbean, air and drone reconnaissance to monitor Venezuela's northern coastal waters, maritime routes and trafficking corridors. Techniques short of full-scale invasion, strikes from sea or air on land-based nodes, airstrips, ports, infrastructure. Deterrence and coercive posture directed at the Venezuelan regime and its criminal networks. Meanwhile, Venezuela is reacting. President Maduro has mobilized militia forces, beefed up coastal defense units, and reiterated that any intervention would be met with unprecedented resistance. Some analysts believe Caracas military is overstretched and logistics challenged, giving planners in Washington and allied capitals reason to believe pressure may succeed. One key consideration: geography and size. The Dominican Republic spans roughly 48,000 square kilometers, Grenada just 344 square kilometers, Panama about 75,000 square kilometers. Venezuela, by contrast, is roughly 916,000 square kilometers. The size alone makes any land-based operation far more complex, militarily, politically, and logistically. The coverage of terrain, defense infrastructure, border regions, and maritime space means that even a limited intervention would be difficult to sustain. Still, by combining high-end assets, carrier group, fighter jets, drones, gunships, advanced logistics, with staging in Puerto Rico, the US has created what one analyst calls an air-sea-land tripod in the Caribbean, designed to give options, not necessarily to mount a full invasion, but to project power, influence Venezuelan calculus, and disrupt illicit flows. In recent statements, the US administration has emphasized the overthrow of trafficking networks rather than the removal of regimes. But the scale of the deployment has made regional capitals wary that the mission sheet may evolve toward regime pressure or change over time. In closing, this deployment sets a new threshold in US military posture in the Western Hemisphere. The combination of a forward-deployed carrier strike group, amphibious forces, special operations platforms, advanced aircraft, and a revived base in Puerto Rico means the Caribbean is now terrain of serious strategic significance. For neighboring states, for maritime traffickers, for the Venezuelan government, the message is clear. US capability is in the region, and the hour of intervention planning is underway. We will continue to monitor developments closely: how long the carrier group remains on station, how air and maritime missions proceed, what the Venezuelan response is, and whether land-based targets become part of the campaign.